I'm Maite Sánchez, and I'm here with Ofelia García, and we will talk about our edited book, Transformative Translanguaging Espacios, Latinx Students and Their Teachers, Rompiendo Fronteras Sin Miedo by Multilingual Matters. And I'm an assistant professor of bilingual education at Hunter College from the City University of New York. And I'm originally from Peru, came to the US as an adult to pursue grad level courses and degrees. Ofelia, would you like to introduce?
Hello, my name is Ofelia García, and I'm a professor emerita at the Graduate Center of City University, where I was a colleague of Maite Sánchez. Maite came to the Graduate Center to direct for many years the project that we know as CUNY NYSEB, the New York State Initiative on Emergent Bilinguals that many of you know about. I'm of a different generation than Maite. I'm also, I also grew up in New York City. So unlike Maite, my bilingualism is different. I was born in Cuba, but came at the age of 11. So I was educated here in the United States. But we have worked well together, and we thought we had an important task to do at a very important time. And so we're here to talk to you.
Yes, and Ofelia, can you share how this book came about specifically?
Yes, I said that this was a very specific time. We had been working on translanguaging for a while, Maite and I, and many of my other colleagues, and we had seen that some of our work had drifted in a way that was apolitical, and it was never our intention for translanguaging not to be anything but transformative. This was also a very particular time. This was a time in which we all were experiencing the effects of COVID. We were also experiencing the effects of the Black Lives Matter movement and the anti-racist movement that was spurred by the murder of George Floyd. We were also in the midst of the Me Too movement. So we wanted to make sure that we looked at education and the education of language minoritized children beyond simply language, because there was much more to it and much more than just translanguaging. We also thought that it was important to focus on Latinx students. Why? Because they make up almost a fourth of all school-age children in the United States, because they're an important group, not only because of recent immigrants, but because of the history of colonization of this American Southwest and Puerto Rico, and the conquering of and racialization of those groups. And because we were in a particular historical time with the 45th president of the United States calling Mexicans rapists, and the shooting at Walmart in El Paso, Texas, of Hispanics. So he came to get Hispanics, he said. So this was a very important political time for us. It was a very difficult time. It was a time of being reflective and critical about what was going on. And we wanted to especially push the idea that translanguaging could be transformative. And so what I would like to hear from you, Maite, now is to tell us a little bit about how it was that the book went about thinking of transformative translanguaging espacios and opening them up.
Yes, and I think, as you mentioned, we have seen teachers doing some of this work in which we see translanguaging in the classroom more than just dynamic language practices, or to use the full repertoire to support learning of English or Spanish in a bilingual program. But we have seen teachers doing this work a escondidas, con miedo. So they thought that they were doing something positive for students, but knew that they were doing something against the rules. So we wanted to, and part of our experience is learning with educators and from educators. So, and we knew that there were so many young Latinx scholars and other colleagues that they were doing this work with teachers and with Latinx students. So we opened the invitation to these young authors that work in classrooms and with teachers. So, and we asked them, as you mentioned, the question is, how can translanguaging be transformative based on real classroom experiences, but also thinking about what else, what are the questions that are raised, what are the learnings that we're having. And this is how this book came about. We have 12 chapters plus the introduction, the foreword, and the
epilogue by
and the afterward, yes. And we have different classrooms. We have bilingual programs, dual language bilingual programs. We have classrooms in which English is a medium. We also have, we wanted to focus on what people call the los otros, the other. So we have chapters with related to deaf Latinx children and also children labeled as disabled. And what we found with this book, once we look at all what the authors have to say about what is happening in the classroom, we really we identified like 4 areas of transformative translanguaging in these chapters, and I want to talk a little bit about them. So the first one we found was, we call it reconfiguring power, reinventando who can produce knowledge and who can name it and who can access it. And really we think about, and we started the book with the idea of gentrification in dual language bilingual programs, because we wanted to really think about this work of translanguage, and that is not only a classroom, a pedagogy for the classroom, is really for students and for teachers to engage in big questions about what changes are happening and who gets to get power, to receive more power, to be placed in positions, and historically and presently. So how English hegemony or a Spanish hegemony, a particular type of a Spanish register, are giving power, and which speakers are left, feeling powerless or made or shown as if they were powerless. So that was a very important element from this book when we talk about the issues of transformative translanguaging. We also look at another area, what we call disrupting established knowledge, opening sitios of ideological contestation where decolonized lenguas can unfold. And here's when we focus on the ancestral wisdom of comunidades, of Latinx people, and how those get enacted and bring into the classroom, and how students and teachers talk about them, and then particularly how they get contested as well, like the hegemony of English get contested. And part of the element is that really questioning this dominant idealized notion of language in bilingual programs, and particularly language separation as if people were monolingual in ones. So part of the transformative power of translanguaging is really questioning and enacting practices that really disrupt that idealized notions. The other transformative power of translanguaging that we call developing Latinx students' critical consciousness, unpacking good para quien, it's related to those elements, but really thinking about education from issues of race, privilege, power, oppression, colonialism, hegemony, sex and gender. So all these issues are embraced, discussed, and in those classrooms. And one of the elements is why English, a particular type of English, has more power in the classroom, in the schooling, in the community, and what can we do about it? And the last element of this transformative translanguaging is what we call the humanizing education for Latinx students, relacionándonos con cariño, confianza, y convivencia. And here is where the issue of humanizing pedagogy, it's at the center of this work on translanguaging in education, in which there are dialogues with empathy and with humanistic principles, and that make and then transform Latinx students and put them in a position of capable academics and to honor and affirm their human dignity. So all of these elements that we've seen, you will find in the chapters of the book, really focus on this notion of translanguaging that is expansive, And if we, there are many authors that think about, well, the only way to transform is when we think about the bigger relationships, US, or in the US or in other places of completely power relationship beyond education, or not only education, but more. And we think that very important. But if we really, for education, if we just focus on something that is so big, we lose the power that is happening in the classroom. So we found there were so many spaces for this transformative translanguaging in education.
I agree with you fully, Maite. I think that one of the powerful impacts of the book is precisely that we describe the practices, the everyday practices of students and their teachers desde adentro, from their own perspective, not from the external perspective that is given to us. And then that we do it like the subtitle of the book says, sin miedo, right? Where we don't have to apologize for having different practices and having practices that are really outstanding, but they're just different. So I think that this is an important contribution to the academic and the real world.
And we think that it's also a very important one in this moment as well, to be engaged. So we hope that you also find this volume interesting, and that made you ask more questions and go and look in these practices in classrooms and in schools. So
gracias, Maite, for facilitating this conversation. Gracias.
Yeah.